Alright, let's go ahead and get off to a start. Looking good on my end? Yes, yes. Looking at the things, yes. Everything looks fine on mine. Today I figured we'd talk about Counterspell. That's sort of the primary things. I feel like there was something else I wanted to talk about too, but who knows what it was. Let's see, I played D&D last night, the end of our two-shot. Went well. The two-shot was a little bit more like a soft intro to a potential new campaign from that Dungeon Master for our Friday group. And yeah, it went well. It was fun. You know, the classic, will we get out of here? Oh no, somebody got taken by a monster. You know, it's a consolidated adventure, so we know that character deaths are going to be very much on the table. Very much can die. So two of the characters got out. One of the characters got turned into an aboleth thrall. So that's going well for them. Aboleths are one of my favorite D&D monsters, along with ropers, some of the other sort of weird ones that don't get pulled out all that often. But I'm always a big fan of aboleths. There's such a cool idea for, especially a boss monster, because they're like thralls and what they do to people, and they're like mind link and telepathy and all that fun stuff. They're really cool. I really like them. The only bad thing about them is that they're kind of aquatic. So they're a little bit difficult sometimes to work in to a campaign, because you're like, oh, and then anytime that something weird is happening with people's minds and there's water involved, you're like, oh, well, it's probably an aboleth. That really narrows down the possibilities of things that could be very quickly. Either that, or you could turn the tables and be like, yep, yeah, well, I just took mind flayers and gave them a swim speed and the ability to breathe underwater, because you know they got big old cephalopod faces, so maybe that makes sense that they swim around. Right, aboleths used to be the masters of the mind flayers, if I remember correctly, official D&D lore. But that actually may vary by the setting. But I think the general D&D lore is that because everybody be slaving in D&D, that's just what they do. The aboleths were over the mind flayers broke free. They were over the Dwargar and the Gith, and the Gith broke free. The Dwargar sometimes break free, or there are pockets of them that are free. But the Dwargar are also taken by the Drow, so you know, it goes both ways. That's a lot of Underdark explanation that's not particularly important, which is very funny. Gith Yankee are sort of like sky pirates, space pirates, if you want to put that, for the most part. Either space monks or space pirates, depending on what type of Gith we're talking about. So it's kind of fun. It's weird to think about them as like, oh, but they were just kind of like in the Underdark at one point, presumably. But of course, if you want all that stuff, you just play Baldur's Gate 3 and get all that lore about the Gith and mind flayers, and why that's so important to the major narrative of that story. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about Counterspell. So let's just go ahead and, I guess, jump into it. So Friday D&D went well. We've got D&D tomorrow. We're supposed to have a fight with a junior Kraken, so we'll see how that goes. Could be bad, could be good. We know it's supposed to be a pretty intense boss fight, so we'll see how that goes. But let's interrupt him. We'll talk about Counterspell. So I'm not sure, and I was thinking about this when I was thinking about things to maybe talk about for the stream. And I was like, oh well, I just watched Dimension 20, an old Dimension 20 episode that had a fight in it that has like a ton of Counterspell, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of not great. And so it made me think about it a little bit more, and I was like, yeah, well, let me refresh my mind on Counterspell, because I realized I don't think I've talked about Counterspell on the channel, especially not, or on my blog, especially on any sort of like specifically pointed about Counterspell. I may have talked about it slightly in passing at one point or another, but never really focused in on it. And I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, maybe I have a little bit of an interesting point of view for it. because I've been playing basically the 5e24 system since its open play test. So we're talking what was that, like 2012 ish? So it's been a long time. So to say that I'm pretty familiar with the systems, all its ins and outs, its goods and its bads. And I'm thinking that, oh well, in that wild amount of time now that 5e has sort of been the go-to D&D, I realized I don't think I've played a single character that has taken Counterspell. Now, Counterspell is only available to a few classes, but I was like, I don't think I've taken it at all. I couldn't think of a specific time at any point that I had taken Counterspell in the past for too many years. Over a decade, right? So I was thinking about it and I was like, well, that's interesting. And I was like, why have I not done that? And then I started thinking about myself as a dungeon master, and I was like, I don't think I've ever used it as a dungeon master either. I don't think I've ever... I mean, if I had used anything that was like Counterspell, it would have been like some sort of trick or trap in a dungeon rather than an enemy spellcaster. So having some sort of trick that counterspells magic in a room or something like that. But most of that time I'd use something like a Dispel Magic or Anti-Magic Zone or whatever over something specifically like Counterspell, because Counterspell has some very kind of specific stuff that kind of goes on with it. And I think that primarily the reason that I haven't used it in anything in these past however many years is that I find Counterspell to be anti-fun. Every time it's anti-fun. Every time that I read it, I go, yeah. Because I know what it's like, and there are other abilities that work kind of like Counterspell. I think Cunning Words is one, though I think Cunning Words is a much better implementation of how to do it. But it's basically, it's anti-fun in the same way that taking an action to quaff a potion isn't fun in D&D. You think about it. Let's set the scene, just so we're all on the same page. You're in this standard dungeon, doing a standard dungeon fight, whatever. And this monster turns around and whacks you, and you're like, I'm getting low on HP. I guess I'm gonna take on my turn. I'm gonna take out this healing potion, and I'm gonna throw it back, and I'm gonna get 7 hit points back. And I guess that's my action, and then maybe I do a bonus action or whatever, and then I go back, and then this monster turns around and hits me again for pretty much all the hit points I just healed. And that's a problem more specifically with how I find healing potions are the amount of hit points you get back from them. Because if you're looking at a standard healing potion, you get back on average about 7 hit points with it. And that's pretty consistent with what a low-level enemy might be damaging you with, somewhere between 3 to 10. So it kind of falls in that 6-7 range pretty easily on average. So you're like, okay, so I took an action to heal hit points I just lost, and there's a high chance that before it becomes my turn again, I'll lose those hit points that I just got back. And so that's why almost everybody's homebrew rule is like, well, you shouldn't have to lose your action for that since you're not getting back enough hit points. That's why everybody's like, well, drinking a potion is going to be a bonus action. Or the other homebrew, which we use in our Friday games sometimes, which is, and actually I think we may have used in our Sunday games as well. Instead of that, it's like, if you decide to take your action, rather than, you can drink it as a bonus action, works as normal. If you use it as your action, you auto max get all the hit points back. So it's like you took the time to make sure that you got every last drop of that red, juicy goodness of healing potion out of that flask before you toss it away. Whereas the bonus action is like you just kind of like take a swig from it and spill most of it all over yourself. And I was like, okay, well that's a good workaround. To be like, okay, if I'm out of combat, then I want to use a healing potion. That's a really nice way that I get a bonus for using the healing potion out of combat. But instead of taking like a short rest to use my hit dice that way, like, or if I really need some healing really quickly, but I still want to do an action on my turn, or you can flip flop or Same way, she can be like, okay, I'm gonna cure wounds on myself, and then as a bonus action, I'm gonna use the healing potion. Or you flip it around, you're like, I'm gonna use my primary action to get the max hit points. I'm gonna get that max, what is it, 10 hit points from healing potion. Then as a bonus action, I'll cast healing word on myself to give me a little extra boost, or use something like that. And I was like, that then it gives you some options, and that's fun. It's important to figure out about making that choice, and that's a lot more fun than how healing potions typically work standard. And I find Counterspell falls very much into that same thing. In the same way that like legendary resistances aren't fun, because Counterspell is basically the player character version of legendary resistances, or you're like, oh, okay, I cast this spell, and it's like, I failed that spell save. Anyways, I just decided to succeed. Like, there goes my 3rd level spell. Awesome. And that's often how Counterspell feels. When you're like, okay, well, I'm gonna cast heat metal on this, big knight that's in armor or whatever, and the enemy caster's like, I Counterspell that. You go, whoop, that was a really cool thing that now I don't get to do. And that's kind of the primary reason that I don't like it, is I feel like it's anti-fun in that way, is that it takes fun out of the game. It takes more fun out of the game than it puts into the game, which is how I feel about Counterspell most of the time. But I'm also not alone on this. I think Counterspell continues to be one of the more divisive points of the game of D&D in the past decade and beyond, even beyond that, but primarily in the 5e area. So I figured we can talk a little bit about some of the points that I saw from the most common reasons people dislike, and we're also going to talk about some of the most common reasons people do like Counterspell and D&D, and be like, where do I fit? Where do I land between the haters and the lovers, and where are you going to fall, and what does that mean when we kind of think about the type of games that we want to run and play in? So I think let's just rip the band-aid off. We'll start with the reasons people really dislike Counterspell, and right off the bat, I feel like that's the best place to start, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about how why people like it, and then sort of my thoughts about each one of those. So the first part, the reasons that people don't like Counterspell, one of the most common reasons, is that you lose your big spell as a player or a DM, and that sucks. That's the exact situation I was just talking about. It basically invalidates your entire turn with a single reaction, which is almost as bad as being stunned. And the stun condition, just like the major or standard action, whatever you want to call it, action of drinking a potion, both of those are pretty widely panned across the general D&D community of being like, that's not particularly fun. And it's fun to lose your turn to something silly, just as it is. It's the entire reason that there is save damage for so many spells, because it really sucks to throw a fireball and be like, oh, well, that guy got out of the way of the fireball, so he doesn't take any damage. And especially on like single target spells. It really sucks to whiff on those. It also removes the teeth from things like evil wizards or other sort of like casting focus big bad evil guys or BBEGs. They're already difficult to make a credible threat in 5e24. Like, it's really tough to play as a dungeon master, play a caster that's really beefy and really difficult to take on a full party in that traditional, how we think about it, cinematic solo boss fight kind of ways. The casters just don't hold up really well because they have to play by PC rules, and player character rules are not really creative with the idea that you will be one player character fighting multiple enemies, multiple times your number of enemies. That's not how the action economy is set up. So it doesn't work particularly well. That's why we have the things like the legendary action, legendary resistances to have BBEGs that have a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more ability to do things and more abilities to kind of protect themselves from the player character, so they can stay in the fight a little bit longer and make the fight a little bit more compelling of an encounter than it otherwise would be. But yeah, in a lot of circumstances, it's just like legendary resistance or like counterspell, where you just go, nope, that doesn't happen. And it's really difficult, I feel like, and this kind of goes right into the second point, is that spellcasters already dominate the game, especially as you move up in levels compared to the martial characters. And it feels like giving them the ability to counter each other, that now your spellcasters are even more overpowered in the game, and they're basically playing an entire different who gets to cast spell games on top of everything else that's kind of happening in the combat. And we talked about that you know, counterspell is another line item in our long list of like cool things that casters can do that kind of outshines the martial PCs, especially with things like specifically counterspell, which is a very defensive thing, because there are a ton of cool martial abilities that already deal with some of that stuff. Like I'm talking about the paladin auras for saves, the fighter indomitable, rogue evasion, and I always want to say cunning dodge, uncanny dodge, and uncanny dodge, are specifically things for kind of like overcoming spells in a lot of ways. That's kind of what they're there for. In 5e, it kind of automatically snuffs, or the base counterspell in 5e, that's one of the changes they made in 2024. The base 5e 2014 rules is that it snuffs any spell slots from the first tier of play. So any spellcaster character can't use anything from those first 4 levels, and really it's technically levels 1 through 6 where they don't have anything that's even 3rd level. So if you're at right until you're in the middle of the 2nd tier of play and you get access to counterspell, you're going to be able to completely rip apart the spell casting of challenge ratings in that area until people start getting a high enough slots to cast spells that you're going to have to start, rolls are going to have to be made. But that is one of the things that I thought was a good change in 2024, is that to make it always a con save. So now that's no longer the case. So now it doesn't, first and second level spells don't automatically go away. That's one of the changes that was made to counterspell. Now you always have to roll the Constitution save, and there's no automatic dismissal for any spell that's going off. When I thought about that and I was looking at the changes, I was like, I would also allow a player character and an enemy caster, if it made sense, depending on what kind of monster they are, the sort of background they're in, is that if they have the Warcaster feat, I would give them advantage on that Constitution saving throw, because they get advantage on concentration checks. And so it makes sense to me, if you are a caster, a Warcaster, as is the feat is supposed to be that the idea that you are trained for doing this specific thing. You would be trained against people who immediately try to dismiss your magic in a war kind of scenario. So it makes sense to me that you would also have advantage on those saves. Now it is Constitution saving throw, though I could also argue that I think Counterspell would probably work better if it was a contested spell attack roll and not a con save. That to me, I know there's another point that I kind of want to touch more on this, but to me that feels a little bit more in line of what I think about like a mage duel kind of thing. Not, oh, I do a thing, it automatically goes off, you need to save against it to see if you can do your spell. And again, that's anytime that you slow down the game, that happens, which is like anything that there needs to be a back and forth and dialogue between players and dungeon masters, things slow down. Your combat specifically slows down, because now instead of being the A, B, C, D happens, now it's A1, then A2, then A3, back again, now it's B, C, D, and we've almost doubled the steps already by having those back and forth interactions. But I do think a contested spell attack roll, despite that it would make things technically take a little bit longer, I think would be a better solution. And then, so we talked about how it kind of locks down the early part of D&D's tiers of play once you get access to it. The other problem is that once you get into the higher level spells where you have, 4th and 5th level spells pretty regularly, you're going to be going through combats most of the time and probably not casting a lot of those 1, 2, and 3 level spells most of the time. Unless you're really out of spell slots. Which, how most people play the game, I don't think would probably happen. But by the time you get to sort of the mid-levels of D&D, that 3rd level spell slot is no longer like a coveted resource. And so you're going to have casters that have 3+ slots of that in a big fight, and they can effectively counter any enemy spellcaster's actions for an entire fight if they try. If that's what they want to focus on and they have their reactions, they don't use their reactions for anything else, they can absolutely laser pointer zero in on an enemy caster and be like, my entire job is to keep that guy from casting spells. And that's not super fun. Like, it's fun for you, but it's fun at the expense of, like, the Dungeon Master who doesn't get to do anything with this monster, so now this monster isn't very good, they don't really have anything, they don't really... Because if they can't cast spells and they're a spellcaster bad guy, they no longer threaten the group very well. And especially once you start getting those levels where you have a bunch of those slots, so counterspelling is pretty common, you do get to the point where you're like, okay, you decide to cast Fireball, and it's like, oh, the enemy spellcaster is like, I'm going to counterspell that. And then you, the PC, the sorcerer, whoever it is casting that, can then counter the counterspell. Which I find, so that is how it's supposed to be work per Jeremy Crawford's Twitter. But I find that to be a really terrible take on the system, which kind of leads me into my next point, is that I touched on it a little bit already, but we're going to dig into it a little bit more, is that the counterspell just slows down already slow combat. And this is what I was noticing the most when I was watching that Dimension 20 episode where they were shooting off a ton of counterspells. It's like, man, this combat really seems to drag, and they forget what point they are in initiative multiple times because of it, and other reactions. That anytime that you add those reactions in, again, if you have an initiative order that's got, let's say your 4 classic PCs and let's say 3 bad guys, you're like, okay, so there's 7 spots in initiative. Now, each one of these guys takes a reaction. Now it takes almost twice as long to get through one round of combat, because you'll be like, this person goes, this person goes, this person uses their reaction. Okay, now this person goes, this person uses their reaction, this person goes, this person uses their reaction. It starts to cascade, and it just takes a very long time, and it becomes very confusing because people are acting out of the initiative order. So it slows down the game. It makes it more difficult to keep clear, like, whose turn it is, where we are in the action, what's happening. It happens all the time with opportunity attacks too. The number of innumerable games that I have run and been in which somebody makes an opportunity attack and we lose our point in the initiative, assuming that the person who just made the attack, it was their turn and they just finished their turn. Like, it happens a lot. Not like every day, but I mean, like, enough that's kind of an issue. That we have to have all these weird ways to track initiative because we might forget it. And actually, the issue usually is that a lot of people are acting outside of their initiative turn. So, and talking about already slowing down combat, one of the things that I want to touch on first is that including sometimes in Dimension 20 or actual plays, but especially in home games, you'll see that most tables don't play Counterspell the way that it's written or the way that it's intended. It's supposed to function like Bardic Inspiration in that you are supposed to decide whether or not you use it before you know what happens. Right? You roll your die and you're sitting with Bardic Inspiration. It happened yesterday when I was playing. It's like, I rolled a 6 on the die. I don't think I'm going to be able to hit this guy. I know his armor class is low because we've been smacking him with like 13s. But I'm like, that's only like a 10. So I'm going to use my Bardic Inspiration to see if I can get it high enough, but I don't actually know. I don't confirm what the AC is. I don't confirm whether the hitter is, whether the attack's going to hit before I do the thing. That's supposed to be the whole point. In the same way that Counterspell is definitely supposed to, the way it's supposed to function, and the thing that I think would make it less popular for people who, especially people who abuse it a lot, would be if you were continually, routinely blowing third level spells to stop cantrips, which is often not what happens. Because for that to happen, your Dungeon Master has to prolong combat in the way that sort of Magic the Gathering plays by announcing, hey, this guy is casting a spell. Does that resolve before we do anything else? Like, you don't get to know who it's targeting. You just see that the guy's casting a spell. Are you going to try to counterspell him, yes or no? And that's supposed to be basically how it works. Be like, okay, this guy's casting a spell. Is anybody doing anything about that? No. Okay, this is the spell. This is what's happening. But that slows down the game because everything has to come to a stop to get like consensus from the table. Be like, is anybody doing this thing? Now, obviously in most groups, you probably have one character, maybe two characters that can cast Counterspell. So it's really only those two. But it's good to ask because you never know what some player character could have some weird ability that allows them to make an opportunity attack when somebody's casting a spell next to them, or who knows what. Or they're going to throw up a mirror image, or though you got to do a mirror image on your turn. I was going to say shield, but you don't even know if it's targeting you yet. And the thing is like, if you run that the way that it's supposed to run, where the DM's checking in and going like, okay, is anybody gonna counterspell the spell before I talk about what it is and what we're gonna do with it? That means if the DM is doing it, the player should also do it, so that way your BBG Lich or whatever it is, and isn't able to cherry pick only the big important spells from your group to counterspell. You want him to be blowing counterspells on your cantrips, kind of thing. Now, this is where we kind of get into it, because I think that playing counterspell in D&D in a very optimized, we'll say optimized, I think that's fine. And I guess I find there to be a slight derogatory connotation to that, but we'll just say in this context, but we'll say an optimized counterspell, using counterspell a lot, spamming it even, is that it is kind of the D&D equivalent of playing a blue Magic the Gathering deck. It's that your fun usually comes at the expense of making sure that somebody else can't do what they're trying to do. Which makes the game slower, sometimes more boring, certainly frustrating, and is one of the reasons that lots of people don't play blue in Magic the Gathering, and also won't play with people who play blue decks, or won't play people's blue decks, because they tend to not be fun for them. They're like, oh cool, another card that doesn't let me do anything on my turn. Neat. Cool. And that's not fun. Like we said, it's the fun for one person comes at the expense of other people's fun at the table, which is not what we necessarily want out of our cooperative game. And you can start to see with something like that, when it gets unchecked, how that DM versus party antagonism can grow sometimes, where you're like, oh, you guys won't let me have fun in the game, so I have to put a bunch of big nasty monsters that come up against you, and then you guys feel like you have to push yourselves to be more optimized, to be able to meet this challenge, and then it just becomes a Dragon Ball Z power level up thing that's not sustainable often. And this also comes from somebody who I played through the full lifespan of the 4th edition of D&D. So I'm also very sensitive when it comes to the length of combat. I'm very sensitive to combat bloat and its effect on speed. 4E was a system where every PC had multiple tangible reactions and interrupts and no actions and free actions that they could be used on other creatures' turns. There's a reason why 4E combats kind of took a minimum of 45 minutes to complete, like even small, relatively easy ones, because everybody's going out of turn order. We talked about that A, B, C, D, E, F kind of situation. E, F, G, I guess, situation. And so you're like, instead of actually having 7 turns, you're having 7 turns, but also you're adding like 7 interrupts in there as well. So the bloat that you have for a round of combat just becomes obscene, and clarifications and starts and stops and starts and stops. And okay, well, that didn't happen, so now I have to walk that back, and now they're going to do this instead, or whatever it is. And I imagine, while I was watching this Dimension 20 combat where they're using counterspells, I feel like, can I imagine a Dimension 20 combat that's already like an edited 2-hour set piece combat for the most part? How long that would be if they were playing 4th edition? Talking about like, that would easily, the edited version, I can't imagine would be any less than 3 hours. Like we're talking, it's like, you're adding another 50% on top of that time. And that's the edited version. Who knows how long it takes them to do the real thing. Played in some 4E combats that was like, sometimes it feels like that's the entire session, where you're easily going like 2.5 hours plus, especially if it's like a big like set piece boss fight. Like those things take a very, very long time. Sometimes they can be the entire session. They can easily fill up like a 3 to 4 hour chunk of time in that system. Which is just kind of a very long-winded way to say that I think we have a lot of evidence that the long combats are draining and boring, and they're not super great for the game. And so we wanted to kind of look at ways to potentially avoid that, and having players constantly interrupting other people's turns to perform, reaction shenanigans in 5e24, counterspells, hellish rebukes, opportunity attacks. They all break the cadence of that game. They're going like, okay, this guy's going to go do something. We have to stop in the middle of his turn because he moved away from 2 guys, so those 2 guys also need to make an attack. Oh, they made an attack and they hit you, but now you're slowed, so now you can't get to where you're going. It's like, okay, well, now that changes what I was going to do on my turn, and now I have to think about what I'm going to do on my turn instead because now I'm slowed. Immediately kind of like breaks down cadence of the game. Everything goes slower. And like I said earlier, I don't know how often, as me myself as a dungeon master or playing in a game with a different dungeon master, have resolved a reaction and jumped into initiative thinking it was that player who finished that turn. Like that happens often. Because you're like, okay, I'm thinking A, B, C, D, E, F, G over here. And then, okay, I have to stop where I am and try to put a mental bookmark in it and set this initiative over to the side and be like, okay, you're doing counterspell. Okay, this guy needs to roll. Okay, now he's rolling for this. Actually, that's a bad example because he's gonna do it. We'll do the opportunity attack or hellish rebuke. Okay, so this guy does this. He does this. He does chewed with this amount of damage. He's gonna end his turn, and then the PC's like, no, actually, I'm gonna use hellish rebuke. Okay, go ahead. He needs to make a dexterity saving throw. Okay, yeah. How much damage does he do? You do 7 points of damage to him. Okay, this guy takes 7 points of damage. Tiefling who did that. Okay, after the tiefling is, and immediately you're in the wrong initiative order. And you're like, oh right, it's not their turn. Even though they're dealing damage or doing some sort of effect, it's not their turn. And so that immediately slows things down. Another thing that I see a lot of people who kind of have big issues with Counterspell talk about is that it breaks the game's intended spell action economy. This is where, circling back on the Jeremy Crawford, you can take reactions on your turn, which is still not a thing that I agree with. Primarily for the same reason. Exact same reason. Like, that is clearly not feels like the intended spell action economy of the game. The bones of 5e24, that you're not really supposed to be taking reactions on your turn. And you take it, so when I was doing this and I was thinking about it, I cracked open the 2024 PHP, what you could do on your turn in combat, and that section says a lot about the intent of the game, or the thought of the game, and sometimes lack of thought of the game. And so, on your turn, it says that you can move and take 1 action. And it also says you can communicate and interact with an object, both for free. So it's very interesting. It's like, the way that it's laid out, it's not even well constructed as to the things you can do, because it tells you can do these 2 things in your turn. Also, there are 2 other things you can do on your turn in addition to that. And neither of those things do they talk about bonus actions or reactions. And you go, what? And this kind of points me to, I think that's becoming more prevalent, or has certainly in the past. I'd say, yeah, I'd probably say in the last 3 years or so, 3 maybe 4 years at this point. Is why I very rarely go to the WotC books for reference, because especially the 2024 books, because I'm looking at this. They had this opportunity with WotC did when they were like, we're going to put out the 2024 D&D, which is a 5.5. It's a minor rules revision for the most part, to the point where the rule revisions are so minor sometimes that you get confused. I've had people use the wrong form of Counterspell or the wrong form of guidance or whatever between editions because they're so similar that it's hard sometimes to remember what has and hasn't changed, because all the tweaks are relatively minor in the difference. But it's why I very rarely have gone to the books now for reference, is that I feel like they had a chance to clarify a whole bunch of things when they brought out the 2024 Player's Handbook, like the counterspell stuff. They could have just added that as a line to the spell too, and be like, hey, you can use this reaction on your turn when somebody tries to cast counterspell on you. You can add one sentence to that and be like, okay, that's done. This is a very specific circumstance, other than this general rule that you can also use reactions on your turn, which is also not something that on the actions of things you can do in your turn also says that you can do, because now you're reacting to your own action, but you're technically already busy doing something else. So how does that work? So it's very interesting to see in the 2024 rules where it's like, okay, you can take an action and you can move, but we're not going to mention that you can take a bonus action. We're not going to say anything about reactions that you can also do on your turn. And then also, here are these 2 other extra things that we're going to codify, but we're also not giving them an action name or any sort of specifics. It's like, oh, you can also interact with objects and talk. And we're not going to call those free actions or no actions or anything. It's just like, oh, and there's also just these 2 other things that you can do. But we don't have any sort of formal structure for it. Cool. So as far as any sort of like rules as intended outside of Crawford's Twitter, and the further we get in D&D 5e24's lifespan, the less I see Crawford's Twitter as being an official source, especially after some of his takes and being like, I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm not sure. Not only do I think that is not a better way to play, I think that's not actually what was intended. I think sometimes, and I think this like counterspell reaction on your own turn is one of those things. And yeah, I think that he's, especially when I think about like Crawford being sort of the lead designer for the 24 reboot, or the 24 rules adjustment, whatever you want to call it, is that if you're the lead designer and you're fumbling in the aforementioned explanation of what you can do on a PC's turn, I'm not sure I can trust that guy's rulings anymore. It's like, that seems like a thing that you should know about your game and have it like ironed out pretty clearly, because that's something that people are going to have to do all the time in the game. It's like the most basic function of the game, is knowing what you can do on your turn. Now, similarly, Mike Burrows, who's sort of the original 5e lead designer, said that you also can use Counterspell on your turn, unless you have cast a leveled spell as a bonus action, thereby adhering to you can only cast cantrips on the spell if you have used a leveled spell as a bonus action. So, and that just makes things somewhat even less clear. And to not have a ruling and be like, so I started thinking about that, and I was like, okay, so I can think about some very specific examples of that. I'm like, all right, so I can, as a bonus action, cast True Strike. As my action, I can cast Fireball. And then if somebody tries to counterspell my Fireball, I can use my reaction to counterspell that counterspell. So that's okay if I used an action to cast the leveled spell. But if I casted Misty Step as a bonus action, which is a leveled spell, and then cast Firebolt as my action, I can't then counterspell that counterspell? That's still 2 leveled spells and a cantrip on the same turn, so that those things seem like they should be pretty equitable. So it's, when I think about that, I'm like, it's clear to me that that's kind of a design goof. That was not, that they were never really, in my opinion, of course. So it's all me. It's all personal opinion. I'm not in, surprisingly, I was not in the design meetings at WotC when they were coming up with 5th edition. I know, it seems like I was there. Like I should have been there, but I wasn't there, surprisingly. But it seems clear to me, kind of playing the game this long and looking through the design and how things work and how things are designed in it. It feels like a goof. Like the reactions were never intended to be used on your turn, and that's why in both players' handbooks don't discuss them. Being like, oh, and also you can take reactions on your turn. Because you're technically in the process of taking action, so how would you be reacting at the same time? Which is just thematically is where I get into issues with the counterspelling on your own turn. You're like, okay, I'm casting Fireball, which is an entire action that does all this thing. In the middle of casting that, somebody is counterspelling me that. So somehow I am stopping a spell that I'm casting in the middle of casting that spell, casting a totally separate spell, and then going back to casting the spell to finish it off. And you're just like, that... There aren't actions that work like that in D&D, that allow you to stop in the middle of an action, take an entirely separate action, and then continue doing the action you were doing. That's one of the reasons, like, move isn't an action anymore. So you move away, somebody hits you with an opportunity attack, you turn around and hellish rebuke them. Like, cool, you took a reaction while you were moving. That's not during an action. Now, you get into weird spaces where you're like, okay, but if I'm taking the disengage action... But then they wouldn't slap at you, right? So that kind of... That's moot. So that doesn't work. But yeah, so I'm like, there are... There's that. So I think that was never intended, but then I think there was enough players that thought the mage battle aspect of counterspelling a counterspell was too cool, that the D&D designers kind of leaned in on the rule of cool kind of aspect, and they're like, yeah, sure, you can totally do that. Why not? We actually don't... They probably were looking at their own rules and they're like, yeah, we actually didn't write anywhere that you can't take a reaction on your turn. We kind of goofed that. We just probably didn't assume that people were going to be doing that, for the most part. And I do think this is an idea where popularity is catered to as at the expense of like the sound game design, so it actually makes the game a little bit sloppier to play with by not doing that. In the same way, I'd say it's similar to how a paladin with like haste and some other shenanigans could get to a point pretty easily where you can make 4 attacks on your turn. So you could very easily, you could do even more actually, couldn't you? If you took something that had Nick, you could get easily 5. Get to a point where you could take 4 plus attacks on your turn. We'll leave it there. 4 plus attacks on your turn. And because of the way that it's written, you could Divine Smite on each one of those, because Divine Smiting is not an action. So if you hit 4 times, you could then Divine Smite 4 times in a turn. One look tells me, as kind of like a design thoughtful person when I'm looking at the game, that's too powerful. That is probably not how that was intended to work. I think the idea was supposed to be, well, paladins don't get a lot of spell slots, we don't want them to waste them, so they should be able to throw it on whenever they want, but it shouldn't take their bonus action because they have other stuff they can do with their bonus actions. So we don't want it to be a bonus action tax on them that they would be using all the time. This would be a good situation. It's like, why is Divine Smiting not necessarily a reaction? So you'd be like, oh, I take my reaction on my turn. Now, paladins have plenty of other stuff they might be doing with their reactions instead. But when I look at stuff like that and be like, oh, well, so now this paladin could pretty easily, let's say, and they wouldn't have to be too high level. Let's say they were 5th level. Get those 4+ attacks. I mean, they're doing, let's say they're using a longsword, so they're doing 48 from just the attacks alone, assuming they all hit. 48 from that, and then what? 2, 4, 6, 8. So 12 d8s of damage plus their modifiers in one turn, and be like, that's a lot for a 5th level character. That's like more than double a fireball. Well, not quite double a fireball. Like, that's a lot of damage to be pumping out in one turn. It's like, that's pretty clear that's not how Divine Smite is supposed to be used. It's weird that it's not written in there that you can only use, you should only probably be able to use Divine Smite once on your turn. Or maybe you make it like whatever your proficiency bonus is, because they do a lot of that stuff in 2024, which is a design idea that I like. Where it's like, oh, you get to do things as many times as your proficiency bonus. That way it already starts to scale. Now, getting into the weeds. Don't worry about that. And the idea is that is like, it's very interesting to see loopholes like that, like the Counterspell or the Paladin Divine Smite kind of, where it can be very, very easily abused very quickly, especially when you compare it to the mini barricades WotC throws up around other multi-class abilities that are much less powerful, like stuff that's around like Barbarian Rage, or stuff that's about things that like give you boost to AC, and oh, this doesn't stack with this, and there's lots of stuff. There's lots of things that are, WotC has a lot of design around things like that. That is very anti-Munchkin, and then you see like some very clear things like the Divine Smites or Counterspell reactions on your turn, where it's just like, but that's also really easy to abuse too. Why are people doing that? Especially if that Paladin had Hex, and they could Hex the creature too, so then they could add an D6 on all those attacks. But man, that'd be a bunch of damage. Alright, but anyway, so that's a lot of the reasons why people don't like Counterspell. And I agree with it. I think I agree with all of these that I'm looking at in my notes. So to recap, things that I didn't like. It really sucks to lose your big spell as a player or DM. It does. To a reaction. Spellcasters already dominate the game, and they do that even more when they're countering each other. Yeah, like I said, it makes them feel like your spellcasters are playing like a slightly different game that's on top of the normal game of combat when they get to that point. Counterspell slows down an already slow combat. Yes, can confirm. Any reactions do, and having a reaction that does spells that shuts down spells is really tough. It really slows things down, because not only that is that you're often taking damage off the board, which means that the combat's gonna go longer, and where generally you want to ratchet up damage so that way the combats are over faster. They're more lethal and they're over faster. So when you're counterspelling, you're taking damage off the table, so you're actually making the combat take longer when you do that. In addition to just slowing it down because you're interrupting turn orders and all that stuff. Casting Counterspell on your turn breaks the game's intended spell action economy, which is a thing that I agree with. Talked about. I think it's weird that you can be taking a reaction in the middle of doing another action, which doesn't make sense to me. It does not feel to me that is how things are intended. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the reasons people like Counterspell. We'll talk about that too. Actually, do that now. No, we're good. Gonna see if I was gonna take a short break. No, we're good. We'll keep moving. Keep moving through it, at least a little bit. Before I take a quick break to re-up on my coffee. Alright, so, one of the reasons people like Counterspell is they claim it's one of the few direct defensive tools against enemy spellcasters. And this is the thing that I think gets into it when I started looking at the reasons why people like Counterspell, is a lot of the things felt kind of like this, where it's just not necessarily true. They're like, oh, it's one of the few direct defensive tools against enemy spellcasters. And like, well, is it? Is it though? So let me just talk about some other things that are also defensive tools against enemy spellcasters. There's a lot of non-reaction spells. Mirror Image, Sanctuary, Silence, Darkness, Dispel Magic, Protection from Evil, and many other control specials. There's also other reaction spells, things like Shield. There are Species Ability, Fey Ancestry, Gnomish Cunning, damage resistances that different species get, Dwarven Resilience, Brave, Luck, Heroic Inspiration, others. And even though some of those come also from things like backgrounds, you also get aspects of things like luck and heroic inspiration. You can get stuff from spells, you get stuff from the species you choose, you get stuff from the classes you choose. We talked a little bit about some of these already. The Paladin Aura, Rogue's Evasion, and Unkindly Dodge. Slippery Mind, which is also another rogue thing. Rogues are really good about not taking spell damage. It's kind of their thing. It is one of their kind of tropes in D&D, is giving them the ability to be like, oh, you can, when you dodge, you don't take damage, and then the Slippery Mind thing. Barbarian Danger Sense, Flash of Genius, Indomitable, Bardic Inspiration through cutting words and things like that, or adding to your saves. Not to mention things like Stunning Strike, which is an offensive defense for spellcasters to be like, just stun them. They usually don't have great con scores. Monks are really good for shutting down the spellcaster. And you'll notice that a lot of these things are specifically on the martial side, where we talked about, changing that ability to give the opportunity for martials to be a little bit better at some things. And there's tons of class abilities. There's tons of species abilities. There's a ton of spells that do it. There's also items. Let's see, Cloak of Displacement, Cloak of Protection, many resistance items, the Mizium Armor, Ring of Evasion, the Ring of fucking Spell Turning, which is crazy. Luck Stones, Ion Stone of Greater Absorption. There's tons of magic items. So there's also backgrounds, and there's also feats, whether you get them through the backgrounds or at your ASI. So to be like there are not any defensive tools against spellcasters is just really untrue. It's like there's actually a whole bunch. There's actually a big chunk of the game's mechanics are about defending against spells. Feats that give you proficiency in specific saving throws that again give you other sorts of buffs against it too. So basically, that there's truly an insane combination of defensive tools you can use to buff player characters against enemy spellcasters, and all of that can be done very well, very easily without counterspell. And I think probably the biggest kicker out of all of that is that with all these tools and all this stuff, all these ways to protect yourself against spells, spell-like abilities, and other forms of magic damage, is that at the end of the day, there just aren't that many enemy spellcasters in D&D. They aren't common. We don't use them very often. We talked about it very early on when we talked about, well, because of the way that the action economy is set up, it's not very useful for a bad guy to be a spellcaster because of the rules that we've put in place. This is where I often deviate. This is a very firm thing that I feel as a dungeon master, is that the dungeon master's monsters should generally avoid having the same abilities and options as player characters. I think the monsters should be monsters and the player characters should be player characters. So I think that the stuff that's in the player's handbook should be the stuff that's primarily focused about their player character abilities. And then I think that the monsters, through the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, should have their own ability and be like, look, usually, player characters can only cast one leveled spell on their turn. But, monsters don't have to conform to those rules. Especially if you're trying to do a solo spell caster. You can just be like, yep, they just start able to cast 2 spells all the time as an action. In the same way that you get like extra attack, because you can make your own monsters and write your own byline, ribbon text and all that stuff, ribbon abilities. You're like, okay, so like The same way that a fighter gets extra attack at 5th level, like this monster gets the ability to basically extra spell at this level. They're able to shoot 2 different spells off as one action. That's how good they are at spellcasting. That's how you know that they are bad. Now, it means that stuff like Monk's Stunning Strike is going to be even more useful than a Counterspell, because with Counterspell you'll be able to knock off one of the spells, but another spell's definitely probably going to get through. And then you have to be like, ooh, which one do I do? Do I go with the first one? Do I go with the second one? Maybe one of them is always going to be a cantrip. And so then, now Counterspell's like tactical and be like, especially if you're doing it the way that it's supposed to be played, and be like, alright, this guy's going to cast 2 spells. You want to stop the first spell or the second spell? And you have to make sort of a roll of the die blind choice, because you don't know which one's going to be the cantrip and which one's going to be the big bad spell. And that takes your reaction to do, and you don't know which one it's going to be, so you do kind of guess. So then it becomes like, oh, well, I can't just spam Counterspell. I have to be maybe really specific about it. Now, I'd probably cut them some slack as a Dungeon Master, and be like, you get to at least see either the person or the area that they're going to target before they cast a spell. So that way they at least have a little bit of leeway, because there are area effect cantrips and there are also single target leveled spells. So it kind of gives you an ability, but most cantrips tend to be single target, and a lot of super powerful spells tend to be area effects, but not always. But that at least kind of gives them a little bit of insight as to kind of hedge their bets a little bit, so it's not just an utterly random choice. Maybe they have an opportunity to see with the first one, you know, who's going to get targeted, and if they're going to counterspell the first one, or wait to maybe counterspell the second one after the first one goes off. And in addition to that, I mean, as far as when I'm talking about, I think that the monsters should have different sort of abilities and options than player characters. I do think that trying to play, and I've not one, but many Dungeon Masters who think it's a great idea, and this is across editions. It's not just a 5e 2024 thing. I've seen people do it in both Pathfinder systems. I've seen them do it in older editions of D&D. I've seen them do it with other systems, where what they do is they're like, all right, I need to make a BBAG or something to fight my party, my group of PCs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a PC to fight them, and be like, that's like the worst thing you can do. It's really trying to run one or more player characters as a Dungeon Master is really, first, it's uninspiring, because all your players know all the things that creature can do right off the bat, because they play those kinds of creatures, because they play them as characters and they understand how they function. They know everything that's going on with them. They're really complex to run as a Dungeon Master on top of everything else that you're trying to do in the game. And it means that if you're going to leave too close to that reasoning, and that it's poor form for players to memorize parts of the monster manual. So if you go with that, which I think is a pretty standard thing. I mean, I think if you play long enough, or especially if you run, you're just going to get to know monsters and know their abilities, because you're going to either be running them or fight them multiple times throughout your D&D career. It's like, yeah, I know that the goblins have the thing where they can disengage as a bonus action. I just know that, and it feels like a normal adventurer who has fought goblins a couple of times knows that they're really slippery like that. Like that's where you try to separate that in character out of character knowledge. And oftentimes if I'm a player, I'll just ask the Dungeon Master and be like, what do I know about these monsters' abilities? Like, do I know what I know as a player about D&D vampires? Yes or no? And usually that's like, oh, well, you know these things about them, and then you can roll Arcana or Religion or History to see if you know anything more about them. But if you're like me, and sometimes you make custom monsters, be like, well, you just don't know that stuff. You never come across something like this before. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much on the defensive tools. There are tons of defensive tools against spells. I don't find the loss of Counterspell to be much of an argument for that, because Counterspell's it feels very much like, if you look at it that way, Counterspell becomes the hammer, and then every situation starts to look like nails, and then you get into the Counterspell spamming. One of the things that I always try to avoid. Another thing for reasons people like Counterspell prevents devastating spells before they ever happen. And this, and the first thing I read that, obviously I went into full sarcasm mode. And I was like, oh, thank the gods. You wouldn't want to encounter those big iconic D&D spells when playing D&D. Thank goodness. Woo! I almost had to play some D&D there for a minute. I got real worried. Better make sure to avoid, let's say, all the other iconic D&D stuff that is just bad, but is kind of the fun parts of the game. Want to make sure that we don't come across the Hand of Vecna. We don't want Black Razor. Certainly don't want to see the Green Devil Face Portal, or encounter the Staff of Power, the Deck of Many Things. We probably shouldn't do Strahd either, because Strahd is that thing, and definitely not Rust Monsters, because we can't lose any of our gear, especially magic gear, as well. We want any of our players' precious PCs to face any actual risk, adversity, or have any stakes in the game whatsoever. Any idea that they might lose their characters, or something upon their character because they were playing the game. So yeah, I went into like full sarcasm mode when I first read that the Counterspell prevents devastating spells before they happen. Like, those are the things that like make the stories, though. That's like the stuff that we remember about the game. When I think about the stories of games where a tiefling warlock got a natural 20, sliding across a stone floor and cutting a rope that bad guys were climbing up. I think about that. I think about those natural 20s, or things like a clutch banishment spell to get out of a combat, or back-to-back calm emotion spells that I've used to get out of ogre or like giant fights before. Doing a crit on inflict wounds that kills a small dragon very quickly in one round, in one action. Like, they could have, like, all those things could have been negated, or some of those things, the spelled ones could have been negated with a counterspell. Instead of having that cool memory of like, oh, when I use that banishment, or the inflict wounds, or the calm emotions, I'd have another brick sort of like in that pile of immemorable slow combats that just kind of become this one cohesive sludge of memory in my mind. Feel like, I remember those times that I was sitting around the table waiting for 10 minutes for my turn. 5 to 10 minutes for my turn to come back around. Yeah, those are the D&D memories I really want to hold on to. The times where I was like, ugh. Okay, I've used my reaction, now I've got nothing to do for another 5 minutes. And I also want to include, so those are all the cool stuff I do, but I also have like good memories of like bad stuff happening too. The times I've been in groups where either my player character or another player's PC gets feeble-minded, or disintegrated, or cursed, or power-worded, or polymorphed, or fireballed, and more. And it's like, including times that I've accidentally absolutely murked other PCs or been blown up by them. At times I've squished PCs with giants, or porting in giant stone columns to crush somebody at a piece of a giant gate, and crushing them with the bad guy that they were with, and be like, sorry. Or, accidentally disintegrating a teammate. The time that I was with the group and we came across a book and we can't read Draconic, so we take it to the leader of the kobolds and be like, hey, can you read this for us? And they open it up and find out that there's explosive runes in that, and they read it and they blow up our allies, an entire room of allies and us in it by reading it. It's like, hey, we brought you a bomb, here's a bomb, thanks. And the only reason we didn't blow ourselves up with it beforehand is that we couldn't read it. Like, that's the stuff that I always find memorable too. It's not just the good stuff. It's always the bad stuff that happens to you too. Like some of that stuff's funny, like drinking water you shouldn't have that's like cursed water, and all sorts of weird stuff happens to you. And what I'm trying to get at essentially is that you're, I don't want to say this. If you're unwilling to risk a game where bad things will happen in your D&D game, and we're talking like sometimes irreparable bad stuff, if you're not creating a game in which that can happen to PCs, then how has the PC earned the right to do it to the bad guys? If that makes sense. It's like, that's... where is the balance in that setup? Because I think if that's the case, if you're like, I want to do all the cool stuff, but I can't let any bad things happen to my player character, I think you've kind of walked yourself into a situation where one of two things are kind of true. The first is that you probably don't trust your dungeon master, or maybe your friends, to roll with the consequences. That if your PC gets disintegrated or whatever it is, you know, I'm listening to a podcast where one of them just got pulled, what is it? Don John card from the deck of many things. It's like, oh, well, you can't trust that your friends are going to take their characters and try to go get you. If you can't find a way to, your friends aren't going to go get you, and you can't rely on your dungeon master, you don't trust your dungeon master enough to help you figure out how to get you back in the game. In the interim, it's like a sidekick character or bringing in a new PC into the campaign. Like, that's one thing. If you're in that situation where you can't let bad things happen in your campaign, that's one of the things that I think could be happening. Is that people just aren't trusting each other around the table to play D&D, essentially. To, like, be like, okay, we are in this cooperatively, try to play this fun game, and so because to get the highs that we want out of the game, that means that we also have to have the potential for the lows to be there too. And trust that, hey, when those big bad things happen, that we're all going to rally together to figure out how to resolve that in an enjoyable way for the table. Especially if you are the person who got disintegrated or whatever. So it's trust issue, number one. Number two is that your group could just be committed to playing a very stakeless, toothless game of make-believe. And this could be like a very, very watered down, like Strixhaven game or something like that. This is where I think where we kind of run into those, a lot of floofy actual play things where it's like, oh, where they're kids at summer camp or whatever. And I was like, that's fine. And I think if you want to play a game that's like just a fun make-believe game, I think that's perfectly cool. I'm not even against it. I'll play in that game. It's like, if that's the group's decision, that's perfectly fine. And everybody's on board with that, and everybody knows what we're going to be doing, sure. We'll play, we're going to run a tavern in this D&D world, and that's going to be the focus of it. And it's like, sure, we might occasionally get off into some misadventures, and we're going to have to clean out the dire rats that are in the cellar every once in a while, and maybe we'll hunt some monsters for ingredients, but they're not going to... that's not really the focus of the game. It's more of a cozy kind of game. And not a, like, we're going to save the world kind of game. I like that. I like the idea of it. I wouldn't mind playing in that or even running it. It's just that I wonder if you needed to bring the D&D specific rule system into that. Like, I feel like that could have been done much easier with a different system. Like, maybe if I went to a super lightweight one, something like a Fate or Savage Worlds, and very sort of like generic as in universal. Like, maybe even you could even use the generic universal role-playing system. You could use some GURPS for that, though GURPS would be a lot of mechanics to do what you're trying to do. Like, I would think I'm thinking like an Obojima kind of style, where it's like, that's a very specific way to play. It's fine, it's just I'm not sure that... it's fun to play, I'm just not sure that you need the D&D for it. Like, you might just... I think you could play another system like maybe a Monster Hearts or something like that, that would give you kids on bikes, something that would give you a rules light easier. The mechanics would get out of the way. I think when you're trying to play a game like that, the mechanics of D&D are trying to get in the way. And so you'd be like, you don't really need Counterspell for a game like that. So it's already, you know, so why are you dealing with D&D monsters and D&D spells and classes and stuff if you don't need to be? Because that's not really the type of game that you're trying to play in. So, yeah, and Counterspell prevents devastating spells before they ever happen. Okay, sure, but I guess if you don't want the game to happen to you, I think there's maybe a larger issue that might be going on with your enjoyment of the game at the table. And higher level casters can shut down entire encounters with a single reaction. This is what we talked about earlier. It's like, yeah, that is one of the things that I put in they put this in the positive field, and I had put that originally in the negative field. It's like, that's not fun. Like, obviously I did have some examples there where I talked about, there are cool times where I was like, oh, I casted Banishment on the Aboleth, and the Aboleth's not here anymore. So that combat's pretty much over. If there's some mooks around, but I just need to stay away from them so that way the Aboleth doesn't come back in a minute. Which is what happened in that fight when I did that, is that I casted Banishment on the Aboleth. Aboleth failed to save, Aboleth left. So if I'm able to hold that spell concentration for a minute, he's just stuck back in their elemental plane of water, I think is where the Aboleths technically come from, into their primary plane. So I had my sorcerer cast it and was like, all right, immediately starts running the other way from the combat, so that way he doesn't get hit with a stray. He's like, I don't want to take any risks. I'm making sure I'm fully line of sight away from everything and just trying to hide for a minute because I don't want the Aboleth to come back. And if you do that every once in a while, it's a fun, memorable thing. If that happens a lot, which can, if you're spamming Counterspell, can happen a lot, being able to shut down, like, the monster trying to do their big bad spell, your BBEG trying to get their big bad spell off, that's maybe going to change the battlefield or change everything, or a lot of the combat specifics are really tied to this one spell going off. Not necessarily great design as a Dungeon Master. If you need the spell to go off, the spell should just already be going off at the start of combat, or be positioned in a way where it's a spell-like ability or something that can't be counterspelled. But as far as high-level casters being able to shut down entire counters with a single reaction, for me, I just lodged this one right under that, where we talked about spellcasters already dominate the game, and they don't really need to reliably be able to do that even better. They're already quite good at doing that. So being able to reliably shut down an entire level block of combats by spamming Counterspell, yeah, anything that's in that sort of first 6 levels of combat, once you get access to Counterspell, it's just like, that's really tough. And I'm not sure, and people are like, that's fun. It's like, it's fun every once in a while, like, very rare. But being able to just kind of nope out of a bunch of combats is not always great. Similarly, when I talked about kind of shutting down things with Banish or Calm Emotions or a lucky Inflict Wounds critical hit, those were not things that those aren't spells that you can reliably get away with shutting down the combat with compared to Counterspell. Counterspell will work on any type of magic. Banish, right, is only going to work if the person's from a different plane than the one you're on. Otherwise, they're going to come back at the end of the spell, and you're still going to have that combat, unless you're running from the combat, which would be a good use of Banish. If you're like, we banish the bad guy, and we spend that entire minute running the hell away. And Calm Emotions, there are lots of things that you can't Calm Emotions on. There are lots of things you can't banish. There's only a 5% chance every time that I cast Inflict Wounds that I'm going to crit on it and roll really well on the dice. And the monster I'm going to fight is going to have that specific range of hit points that are be able to be taken out with that one spell. Those are not reliable in the ways that Counterspell are. Or Counterspell is how it functions. And I think that problem also goes both ways. So I think people look at this and go, high-level casters can shut down encounters with a single reaction. And they're like, that's a great thing. That means that, guess what? The monster casters can also do that too. It goes both ways. As a Dungeon Master, I can always smatter a handful of chump casters with counterspell prepped behind some cover, like around the combat arena. Like, just split them up, have like 3 of them. They're at the very fringe of combat. They're far away from everything else because they only need to be within 60 feet of the caster they're trying to target. And I could just have them, and that would be the entire thing they do. They literally use their turn to probably take the dodge action on their turn, and then just use their reactions to counterspell. And they're like, I'm guessing, like, if the tables were turned and I did that, and you guys were fighting a dragon, and there were just like 3, chump acolytes just on the periphery, just shutting down spells that you were trying to cast against the dragon. I'm guessing that as a player, most players would not find that a fun combat, especially as a spellcaster. The marshals are going to be like, whatever, I don't care. But the spellcasters aren't going to like that, especially if it's like I said, they were fighting a dragon who already has like legendary resistances on top of that. You're like, hey, do you want to make sure that your casters feel like they can't do anything in combat? Give them the legendary resistances for your big dragon, and then they're probably going to spam a bunch of cantrips early on in the fight because they want to get through those legendary resistances before they can start casting big spells, and then having the casters who are using their reaction to get rid of those cantrips even, so making the legendary resistances last longer in combat. Then that drags out the combat will be much longer. It will not be fun for any caster PCs. The marshals will probably be okay with it because it's not going to change most of how they do. You might have one cool monk. This could be a cool monk fight where the monk's like, I have a bunch of speed, so I run around the periphery attacking all the casters and trying to take them, stun them, and get them out of the fight so that my casters can cast. That would be a really cool combat, but if you wanted to tune it specifically for somebody who was like playing a monk character, to be like, this is going to be like the one where they can shine. But then you also have to assume that the monk player will play like that. Which is maybe not the greatest design conceit when you're... when it all hinges on a player recognizing that they can do a thing that nobody else can, and that they need to be doing that thing, and you have to be very explicit if you're going to plan it out that way. But like I said, if you take the high-level casters can shut down entire encounters with a reaction, and you flip it for the DM can do that too, suddenly combat goes from being really cool, and I really like Counterspell, to be like, I hate the spell. It's awful. So yeah, I think it is very much. The other things that I saw were Counterspell rewards game knowledge and tactical timing. And I almost touched on it, but then I was like, no, we'll talk about this later. So I didn't want to talk about it a little bit earlier on the things I didn't like about it. Like I said, if I was running a enemy spellcaster who had that ability, like I said, who was able to cast 2 spells in one action, and even if one of them was always a cantrip, then I would say that would reward game knowledge and tactical timing. Because now you're actually having to do something with your reaction. You have to really pay attention. But the way that I generally see Counterspell being played, the way that it's supposed to be played, right? The player shouldn't know what spell's being cast before they choose to counterspell. They're not supposed to know at all. You should be guessing. Now, you might be able to make an educated guess based on some circumstantial evidence about what's going on, but you're not supposed to know the spell. And there are people who will be like, oh, well, can I make a roll to be able to determine what the spell is? And it's like, yeah, you can do that, but that is your reaction, and you can only have one reaction, so either you're going to make your reaction to identify the spell, which is a little useless because the spell is going to go off and you're going to be able to recognize it probably anyways. And if you use that reaction to do that, then you also can't cast Counterspell. So that's generally how it goes. Now, the thing is, like, most people don't run it that way. And there are people who, especially people who really, really abuse Counterspell, is what I've seen, is that they're kind of, we're going to say, dickish kind of play. Where, like, I wait until The DM says who the targets are for the spell, what the save type is, or they say the spell name. And once they say one of those three things, if not multiples of those things, then I announce that I'm going to cast Counterspell. That way I'm never wasting it on a cantrip. And be like, okay, that's not how it works. And if you continue to do this, what's going to happen is that I'm going to turn that back on you in-game. You're like, okay, if that's the way that we want to play this, then if you know this tactic, then that means that enemy spellcasters also would know this tactic, because it would be very common to come anytime that you're fighting other casters. There's no reason that enemy spellcasters wouldn't wise up to that, especially once you get into the higher levels. Like, you already have counterspells, so obviously you're it's 3rd level spell, so you're at least 5th level, right? You get at 5th level or 6th level. When do you get 3rd level spells? Up at the top. Anyways, there's some levels. That's what I'm saying. So you're going to be what would be considered like a pretty experienced caster. So there's no reason that they wouldn't have come across this situation before. So I would say that the Dungeon Master can easily have monster casters spend a bonus action to pretend they're casting a spell to bait PCs into counterspelling nothing. Not only are you not counterspelling a cantrip, you're counterspelling actually nothing. Because the language is, the way that Counterspell's language works is that when you see a creature casting a spell, it doesn't say when a creature casts a spell, when you see a creature casting a spell. So a spellcaster knows how to cast spells, which means that they're probably going to be pretty able to fake it pretty easily. Because they're doing a little feint. The same way you do a juke in football, or a double clutch in basketball, and lots of sports terminology, I know. But the fakes are part of it. But you're a very skilled player. It's important to be able to, throw people off the scent of what you're trying to do. So when you see a creature cast a spell, doesn't necessarily mean that that creature is casting a spell. So I would be like, oh, in the same way the counterspell generally isn't supposed to work on the way that we interpret it at any table I've ever seen. The counterspell doesn't counter like cultists doing a big ritual, though the way that it's written is like you should be able to counterspell basically a big ritual. And they should have to roll for it every time that you try to counterspell the ritual. But that's not how we play it, right? So, if that's the case, then there's no reason that we can't be a little bit more flexible about what can and can't be counterspelled. So I would start having, if you were being a real dickish player about it, first, obviously, I'd have the conversation and be like, hey, look, you actually need to call that before that. And if you don't start doing that, then I'm going to start adding in feints. And I'll be very precise with my language. Or I'll have to stop combat and be like, are you going, and look at you specifically every time. Be like, this person is casting a spell. Are you going to counterspell it? I don't really want to do that. I think you should be doing that naturally, but it is what we are. Or if you keep doing it, the bad guys are going to start throwing in feints. They're going to start doing that. They're going to try to get you to waste your counterspell. As for tactical timing, so that we talked about the game knowledge aspect of it. Now about the tactical timing as far as it. Rules as it's written and apparently intended is that you're more likely to be using counterspell outside of your turn most of the time. Usually it's not counterspelling a counterspell. You only have one reaction per round. And for most of the spellcasters that get access to counterspell, they don't necessarily have a lot going on in the reaction department for the most part. It's usually things like counterspells, like when they're being targeted or something. Whether that's a shield or cutting words or whatever it is. It's just that because of the classes that get it, that's less likely that those player characters would be good at doing things like scoring opportunity attacks, so they would rather, instead of taking the opportunity attack, maybe save it so that way they might be able to counterspell something. This would also be the baiting thing. It was like I would try to bait wizards or whatever into like using a cantrip to make an opportunity attack, so that way they lose their reaction. That's very common DM sort of meta strategy to like mess around with the action economy in that way. And usually there's not more than like a single enemy spellcaster, like a single monster spellcaster in combat, because as I kind of said earlier, like building a PC, like they're kind of a pain in the butt to run when you're like, and now I have to keep 7 different spells on tap and think about what they're going to use the spell for during combat. And so outside of like things like the Hellish Rebuke or Shield and those sort of specific reactions, there's not often a lot of standard reactions that spellcaster PCs who would be using Counterspell often do. And I'm not sure you can call that tactical timing if there's generally only one target to do. There's generally not something else you're doing with reaction. I consider that to be like doing the one thing you're good at most of the time, which is spellcaster cast spell. So I'm not sure I would call that being specifically tactical. I would call that the wizard casting spells. This is what I would call that. It'd be like, you played a wizard and the wizard cast spells. Correct. I'm not sure that makes you, unfortunately, a tactical genius for doing the thing that you're good at doing. And sort of the last one that I often see people bring up, that we touched on a little bit briefly already, is that it creates this it's not dynamic. It creates this dramatic, cinematic wizard duel moments. And I think it's clear, looking at sort of what WotC was envisioning with Counterspell when they made the edit in 2024, where low-level spells don't auto-fail, that all spells can now overcome Counterspell with a Constitution saving throw. I think that they were like, oh yeah, this will be the dramatic cinematic wizard duel moments, but it's not really a duel when you think about the practicality of how it works at the table. It's a straightforward, I cast a spell, the other person goes, I'm going to counterspell that, so you need to make a Constitution saving throw. Oh, well, I'm going to counterspell your counterspell. And you have to counterspell the counterspell before you make a roll to save against the first counterspell. Already gets very confusing very quickly. And what it kind of boils down to is it means that if there's a side that has 2 spellcasters with reactions that have actions to have the ability to counterspell, they can almost ensure that any enemy spell doesn't get through. Because like we said, there's very rarely a case as Dungeon Masters that we often run combats that have more than one spellcaster in our ranks, just because they're a pain in the butt to focus on, and they're really easy, unfortunately, to lock down because of stuff like this. And because they usually have some low AC and not a great amount of hit points, they're really tough to put up against a party. So then if you have 2 spellcasters, if you have who gets access to it, so bards and say a bard and a wizard on your side, and they both have reactions with counterspell, they can pretty much shut down that enemy caster pretty reliably. So and think about it this way: if this person is like, okay, the lich raises his hand to cast something, and the wizard's like, I counterspell. Okay, he's gonna make his Constitution saving throw. He makes the saving throw, so the spell's going to go through, and then the bard goes, I also cast Counterspell. It basically gives you 2 reactions, so it's basically having, it's almost like having disadvantage on that Constitution saving throw in Counterspell. Now, you had to blow 2 third-level spell slots for it, but it does ensure that the lich doesn't get off whatever that spell is, which, in this circumstance, it's lich, so it's probably a bad spell, so that's probably a good idea. It's probably a good use of a spell slot. This is where I get into things where it's like, imagine if Counterspell triggered like a versus spellcasting check or something more interactive. I think I'd be more lenient on this, especially things that this wizard duel moment, because I feel like that's not really how it plays out at the table. It's like a confusing back and forth of like who makes Constitution saving throws. So I do think that there is like, if it was like, okay, lich raises their hand to cast a spell. Okay, I'm going to counterspell that. Okay, you guys both need to make opposed spellcasting checks, d20. And then that, for me, I'm like, okay, that's kind of like a lean-in moment. Like, let me do a full, see if I can think of a very specific example. That was a little loosey-goosey, but it's pretty close. Because I want to do one that's got like multiple people in it. Let's see. I was just looking at Hallister, so let's do, yeah, like a mad wizard. All right. Let's imagine that the mad wizard raises a finger at the, let's say, bloodied ranger, and begins to chant magic. The person's like, I cast Counterspell. Awesome. Let's see. He's gonna roll a d12, or not d12, a d20. He'll get a 12, plus 8 on his Constitution saving throw for, or sorry, this would be a spell attack. That's the example I'm doing. He rolls a 12, has a plus 8 bonus for their spell attack, so he has a dirty 20. So you need to roll a 20 or better on your spell attack when you're doing this to keep the spell from going off. And, you know, this person might be like, oh, dang, I only have like a plus 6 modifier. So I'm like, I actually have to roll pretty high. I need to roll like a 14 plus. And then have other people about the table being like, oh, remember, because this is an ability check now, you have Bless from my cleric. Or, actually, Bless, that's the one thing Bless doesn't do, right? We'll say Guidance. You have Guidance from my cleric. Oh, great, you also have a D6 Bardic Inspiration die. Like, alright, cool, so I've got my D20 that I'm going to roll, plus my 6, and then if I need it, I have this D4 from Guidance, not Bless, and this D6 Bardic Inspiration that I can choose to use after I see all my dice. And I think about that, like, that situation is already way cooler, and it's more involving, because now it's like the team is giving a full effort to, like, keep the spell from going off. It's not just the one character just be like, I blew a 3rd level slot, so it doesn't happen. Though in this example, they rolled a 12 on the dice, so they're probably going to make that con save. Well, maybe. And Wizard's con save might not be great. Might not make it. It depends. It'd be close. Be close. But instead, you get to do this thing where it's like, alright, he's going to do this thing, he's going to set the DC, now you know what you have to roll. You get to use different stuff from other people, whether that's the Guidance, or Bardic Inspiration, or this would be a great thing where somebody's able to use like the Divination Wizards aspect, or you can throw luck on that check to be like, oh, and I really want to make sure the spell doesn't go off because I think I know what it is. And I just think that would be a cooler way. So basically you're blowing the 3rd level spell to just for the opportunity to counterspell it, which is how the 2024 rules have been changed now to reflect. Now there's no more auto dismissal. So it's like that already is something. You're basically giving up a 3rd level slot on the opportunity the spell might fail to create that opportunity that otherwise it would not. So yeah, I think that's how I would start looking at approaching how to improve Counterspell to make it a little bit more compelling, especially as that idea of a wizard's duel kind of moment. I think I would remove the ability to counterspell a counterspell, which I already don't like, and already slows down the game even more. And you know, as I said, my humble opinion would be to remove the idea that you take reactions on your active turn. I just don't think when you're interrupting your own turns to take reactions and other people are interrupting your turn to take reactions, it just slows down the game a whole lot. So having very few, very specific reactions and taking off stuff that you can do on your own turn. Now, I do realize it doesn't mean that if you're doing something, like it's your turn and you move away and you get hit with an opportunity attack, you can't hellish rebuke that person. I mean, there's a lot of those things where, or you would use shield in that circumstance. But if you use shield, then you wouldn't have to use a cantrip on your turn. Because that's how that's written. So yeah, I just don't think that it would be that big of a change, I think. And I think it would speed up things quite a bit if we did stuff like that. But anyways, I would take away the counterspell of counterspelling. Because I think it is silly to be like, I'm casting a spell, and then I'm also trying to cast another spell with my offhand while I'm also, like, now I'm a wizard doing a bunch of multitasking. Try to get one spell to go through by trying to cast 2 spells at the same time. So I would remove that counterspell aspect. I would make it that head-to-head roll. I think versus rolls are So versus rolls are a very fundamental type of D&D D20 test. It's one of the three. Right? We have our basically our attacks and our checks and our saving throws, which are all you are trying to hit a static number, and then we have contested rolls, where it's like, oh, when you two people are trying to roll against each other, which is like breaking grapples and things of that nature. And I think they're very rarely utilized outside of, like I said, those grappling checks. You don't see a lot of head-to-head D20 contests. I think it's really good for creating the, like, everybody leans in to see the roll when two people are rolling off moment. The sort of things that we want as the D&D players, but we don't often get sometimes. So making it a head-to-head roll, everybody's going to lean in very much on those. I would also make the change so, again, once we make an ability check, then we are able to do the things like throw guidance on it, throw bardic inspiration on it, be able to change things out, roll things. I can use luck on it. Now it becomes something that we can pull in other stuff into, and not just this one character is now the focus. We could like make it more of a team thing where everybody's kind of working it in together based off the resources they have. And then the other thing that I might do to improve Counterspell is I might reduce the range. So Counterspell has a range of 60 feet, which is pretty good. But I might half it to 30 feet. That way, if you want to be a person who casts Counterspell, you have to stay basically within a move of the nasty monsters with the sharp blades. You can't fully crouch all the way in the back. And you can't do the Warlock thing where you're 120 feet back just throwing Eldritch Blast the entire campaign, or the entire combat. Like, you need to actually stay pretty close. And so by staying close, that means that the monsters are also close to you. So if you are counterspelling the Mad Wizard's going to look at their, let's say, skeleton soldier flunkies and be like, go kill that thing immediately. And then some bone boys are going to rattle their way over to you and start chopping at you with their rusty scimitars. And you have to deal with those. Which I think would improve the game. You always got to keep the spellcasters want to be on the periphery of the fight. If you're being a very tactical spellcaster, you're like, you don't want to be mixing it up most of the time. You got low AC, you got low hit points. You're easy to hit, and you're easy to go down, and you are generally pretty glass candy. So you want to stay back. So forcing them to have to come closer to do this really, really potent spell now becomes more of a tactical assertion. Now you're like, okay, if I want to be able to counterspell big nasty spells, I need to be close. If I get in close, there is a chance that a stray monster is going to peel off and come after me. Or, you know, the big bad guy is actually going to be able to get to me in a move, doing that sort of stuff. Now it becomes a more tactical play and be like, okay, now do I move in and attack, and then I'm in there for a round, and then on my next turn I'm able to attack and then step out of the range. That way I don't have to worry about the thing coming in. Now you've got this tactical, like, back and forth thing movement that you're trying to do. It already adds like another little actual tactical layer about thinking about your positioning and how close you want to be and when. And then if you're still within the 60-foot cone or 60-foot spell range of whatever they're going to do, or the 30-foot range where they can move up to get within the 30-foot range to do whatever. So you have to stay usually closer to the danger, which I think is a good trade-off for the power that is Counterspell, especially when we're going to add this aspect of a head-to-head roll, potentially, where you can start layering on a bunch of bonuses. So it's likely that you're going to be able to be very successful with Counterspell most of the time. But you also have to give up a spell slot. You might also have to burn other people's things like the Bardic Inspiration or luck points or something like that. And you also gonna have to stay close to the bad guys. Which means the bad guys have the opportunity to be like, if you become too much of an issue, like you're keeping spells from going off, then they're going to turn their attention to you, and you're going to be within range, and they're going to be able to get to you. So now there is this tactical layer, and now there's this way where the bad guys can deal out a little bit of punishment because you're not so far, you're not fully 60 feet away. They don't have to burn basically a turn trying to get to you. So yeah, I mean, that's most of my thoughts about Counterspell, the reasons people like it and reasons people don't like it. Now, obviously, we went through the reasons people like it, and I think the only thing that really came to me is that I think there's a lot of stuff in here that people say that they like about it, and the things that I want to like about it. Except for the defensive tools against spellcasters. It's like, there's tons of that in D&D. That's silly. Don't be silly. That's silly. And, or the idea that's like, it's going to prevent devastating spells from happening. It's like, that's kind of the point of playing the game, though. It's like, if you're going to have the ability to throw the big spells, you need to be able to take some of the big spells, too. And shutting down entire encounters by using their reactions. It's like, yep, that works, but it also works the other way, too. And the thing is that when it works the other way, people don't like it very much. It's often how that goes. It's like, no, I like it when I can do it to you. I don't like it when you can do it to me. Different. The idea that it rewards game knowledge and tactical timing, I'm like, but not really. Not if, like, again, that's why I would change a little bit. Like, those are the changes I would do that would make it a little bit more knowledgeable. Now you're a little bit more knowledgeable about, like, oh, you remember that most monsters can move 30 feet, but if they can move further than 30 feet, then if you're going to stay within counterspell range, something can easily get to you. And now you actually do have to make kind of like tactical choices about like when to cast counterspell. Are you sure that you're not going to be counterspelling a cantrip? Or different things that we kind of added up. The wizard's duel moments, yeah. Be able to change it to an opposed spell attack roll, which I think works a lot better. And it's going to have, not only does it work better, like I said, it's a thing where people like lean in, where it's like everybody wants to pay attention to that roll to see how it goes when it's a head-to-head roll like that, because they don't come up that often. So, I mean, I guess if I wanted to kind of summarize everything I want to talk about, essentially, I don't foresee that Wizards of the Coast is going to change anything about Counterspell before D&D 6th edition. And you might be going, there's not going to be a 6th edition. There's always going to be another edition of D&D. That's the only thing that we know. That's the only constant we know is change. So, absolutely, at some point, they're going to want some more money out of it. And they're going to get themselves a 6th edition. Though, you know, D&D's popularity recently has been, and WotC's practices recently have been, been interesting. So, who knows? Maybe they'll end up kicking that license out to somebody else. I don't know at this point how much of a moneymaker D&D is for Hasbro in general. I think quite a bit. I think it still is quite a bit. But there were attempts a few years ago for people to try to maybe spin WotC back off into its own thing. Investors were interested in making a play for that because Magic the Gathering and D&D make quite a bit of money, and Hasbro's toy sales, not nearly as much. So people were like, well, why don't we take the actual lucrative portion of this portfolio and spin it off into its own thing, and that would be better for investors. Now that failed, but you know, we could see a replay for something like that. But we could also see them maybe. I think it's probably. I think the IP is probably too valuable. I can't imagine that they will want to release it to somebody else at this point. I don't think they'll sell it. So I don't foresee them changing anything about Counterspell. That's a very long tangent about business stuff. I don't think that there's any chance that we're going to see any particular changes until we get another edition on Counterspell. I feel like they made the changes they were going to make in 2024. Some of them for good. I feel like a lot of them are not better changes, or in fact worse changes for the game in general. And I just don't think, like, at this point, given all the changes in 2024 and all the weird stuff WotC is doing as a business, that I trust what's left of the D&D design team at WotC to, like, make those changes happen, even if they were going to do it. I'm like, they've got such weird pressure internally coming from different things on what to do, and there's a lot of scrutiny on them from outside the company. A lot of people are really watching it like hawks because, you know, WotC's been doing some real weird stuff. And, you know, with sort of your big dog's gone out of D&D. It's like, who's leading that design? And who's making the choices? So who really has the power to make the decisions about what gets changed in there and what doesn't? And we talked about a little bit that like I haven't used Counterspell as a player character in 5e24, and I've only played with a few people who have used it. Honestly, only run for a few people who have used it. And to this day, I haven't barred anybody from using Counterspell, which would be the natural reaction. I know a lot of dungeon masters kind of go that route where they're like, well, Counterspell's just not going to be a thing in this game because I don't want to mess with it because it's a pain in the butt. If a new player, if I was at the table that I was running, if a new player came in and they were hot spamming it, like I said, I'd make the adjustments. I'd have those. I'd have the conversation first, like, and if they still didn't have it, we'd probably have a second conversation and be like, hey, I told you if you want to do that, you got to do it before I start talking about what the spell is. And if that doesn't work, then we're going to start making some in-universe adjustments and be like, I wouldn't tip off what spells were going to be cast. And like I said, the enemy spellcasters would start using spellcasting feints to try to lure you into casting a spell. And then I would start refocusing on monsters that use spell-like abilities, which can't be counterspell because they're not a spell technically. So you basically take spells and you're like, well, this is now an ability this character has. So like I said about the creating an enemy caster that's able to cast 2 spells in one turn and be like, oh, this is one of them is like the cantrip, which is like, oh, this is a spell like ability they have. They can't actually be counterspelled. Even though it's a very cheap way to get around some of that stuff, but it really only affects counterspell for the most part. And obviously I was going to talk to the player about the counterspell spamming. The thing that also kind of goes into counterspell spamming, like using a whole bunch of those 3rd level slots, cast counterspell, is that it's likely in my games, the games I've run, that the parties are often having multiple combats between long rests. It's not the 15-minute workday kind of style of game. It's be like, hey, if you go through that first encounter and you shred all your 3rd level slots, you're going to put the party in a worse condition overall going. Is because you're not going to have access to some of those higher level slots, and then if you want to counterspell later, you're going to have to start using higher and higher slots. Do it, and then you're going to be left with your 1st and 2nd level spells, and that's not going to work for, like, let's say a 7th level wizard or whatever, but 7th level sorcerer, and be like, you can't rely on those low level slots to be the output damage that you want to be as a sorcerer when you can't bring fireball to bear or something like that. So instead of being like, no, I really need to save those 3rd level slots for very specific spells. I guess the silver lining of that as a dungeon master is I wouldn't have to deal with as many fireballs, which is also nice. It means that I could run a lot more mooks, horde-like mooks, with less of a deck clearing control spell like fireball that's maybe not on the board. And then know that I can always challenge them with that because I can always rely on the player character, that one player to cast counterspell too many times rather than save their spell slots for fireballs or other sorts of wall of fires and other kind of control spells for dealing with like a horde style combat encounter. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all my thoughts on counterspell. I was surprised that I hadn't brought it up to this point, so hopefully that's useful for you guys to kind of like take a look at and think about it and think about what do I want to do with counterspell? Do I want to keep it as is? Do I not want it in my game? Would we tweak it? Like, one of the things I would do is that if I had somebody who was really interested in playing counterspell kind of focused caster, like that one to be, and it was thematic for their character, like they were like a warcaster, mage slayer thing like that, like they're like an anti-wizard, like that's their background, like a mage slayer kind of thing they have access to. I'm not sure what that build would look like, but I'll assume that that's what they wanted to do. That was kind of their thing. Then I'd be like, oh yeah, absolutely, we can do counterspell in the game. And then I talked to them about maybe making the adjustments, about being like, what if it's a versus roll off? I'm like, we're not saying that we're going to keep it forever. I just want to try it out. We'll see how it goes. I just think it's going to be a little bit more interactive and a little bit more fun if we do it that way than counterspell as it's written. Get their buy-in. Be like, we're going to check it out. We're going to see how it is. It'll give you the ability to add all that, like I said, those bardic inspirations and those heroic inspirations, the Uh, the bardic inspirations, the luckies, then be able to add all that stuff onto Flash of Genius, add that kind of stuff onto your character. So it's like, if you want to do that, then let's go that route and see how it works out. We can always walk it back if we need to, but I think that will make it more like you want your team to kind of keep those buffs on you, so you're better at doing the thing that you're doing at, and then it feels a little bit more like a team effort, trying to keep enemy spellcasters from doing what they do. So I think that's how I go. So I think at this point I'm going to take a quick little break, and then I think we're going to talk about. I'll say we got a little bit of time left, I feel like, so I'm going to take a break and take a little bio break, refill my coffee. We'll come back. I'm going to talk a little bit about Shard Lake, which I think we're going to add to the appendix in real quick, and I'll talk. It's something I watched this last week that was interesting, and why I kind of liked it, and why I put it in my appendix in. And then if we have a little bit left over time, we'll see how I feel. My throat's already getting a little dry, so we might not do it. We might do some mapping, but I think we might just be done with the appendix and stuff. Because I wasn't expecting to get through the counterspell stuff so quickly. I feel like sometimes for these streams, I prep a whole bunch of stuff, and then I don't get through like a third of it. And then sometimes like this, where I'm like, oh, I'm really kind of like focusing on this one thing, and then it doesn't take me as long to get through. That's the nature of the beast, though. That's just like prepping D&D sometimes. Sometimes you overprep, sometimes you underprep. Though I wouldn't say underprep too. I think I'm pretty accurately prepped. But I'm going to take my break. So you guys hang on. Oh, by the way, there's a new DRB screen. So you get to check out a new little image for that. I'll be back in just a few minutes, so hang out. And I'll be right back. I have returned. Now, build. So, what did you guys think about the Counterspell? What are your guys' experiences with it? If you have any of those, go ahead and throw them down there. I'm gonna take a look at them. I know, obviously, turning a Counterspell into something that does like opposed spell arcana checks or spell attacks is definitely not pioneering ground. I'm not saying that I have invented the wheel or anything. In any ways, I'm reinventing it. I'm just like, I think that is a very useful way to interpret that, and that's how I would do that. But go ahead and on. I said we're gonna do appendix in, right? Let me pull that up so we can take a look at it. There we go. I guess technically this. There we go. Alright, we'll click down there. Yeah. To my index, and I think I only have one. Do I have any others? Well, maybe I do. Yeah, maybe we'll just fill it out. We'll see if I have some others come to mind, but let's go ahead and throw these in. Well, obviously you guys gotta see what I'm gonna see. Anything else? Yeah, hold on. One moment, please. Window capture. We capture. There we go. Perfect. So that's our appendix N. And other things. Oh, right. So last weekend at my Sunday game, we had to get together. Our friend that is the dungeon master, who was on call, so we weren't able to play normal D&D because we never know when they're gonna have to get up and leave. We instead played a number of different. We had more of a board game kind of evening instead, and we played a game called Utter Nonsense. Utter Nonsense. Nope. Maybe easier to. Is a card judge game in the same vein as like Cards Against Humanity, so it plays very much very similar. Yeah. So essentially, with Utter Nonsense, go ahead and open. That's a big image. So the way that it basically works is a similar card judge game. So you get 7 in your hand. Some person's a judge. Everybody else plays their cards off of whatever the prompt is. In this specific game, in Utter Nonsense, the prompts are, as the card giver, as the judge, are accents, and you have a handful of these white cards that have different phrases on them, and you can choose which one that you want to basically do in a robot accent. And there are a lot of different types of accent cards. And so that's the game. So in this instance, I might do something like, "Don't ask me, ask Siri." "Don't ask me, ask Siri." And that might be the thing that I do. So we played that, and it was very funny for me. I ended up really cleaning up in that game, which is very interesting, because I think I have said multiple times on the channel, it's just like, as Dungeon Master, is like, I don't really do accents. It's not really my thing. So it was very interesting to to end up kind of winning in kind of a landslide. And I wouldn't say that any of it was based off of that. I think I found my strategy was I looked at the cards in my hand and basically like went through my mind and been like, okay, do I feel like I can get through the first sentence of this with the accent somewhat intact? If that answer is yes, and that's the best one I can read, and this is the one that I was often so I played differently, I feel like, than other players. Other players often were trying to look for the one, like I said, the "don't ask me, ask Siri" thing. For robot, is they tried to pick the one that was most aligned to that accent. And I was often going through whatever was going to be the easiest for me to read, and then it was good to it was fun to have the juxtaposition and be like, why is this character saying this specific thing, and then just kind of leaning into the this is all sounds very stupid actory stuff, kind of the like performance of it, be like, oh well, I'm just going to be that person saying this thing rather than trying to say this thing in a specific accent. Be like, if I feel like I can get through the first sentence pretty naturally, even if the accent completely falls apart by the time I get to the end of the phrase, because some of them are long. These are all short cards, but some of them are like 3 sentences. They're kind of long. They're a big portion of the card. So it's like, if I can make it through the first with the accent somewhat intact, it should probably be okay by the time I get to the end of it. So I really just kind of have to sell it on the merit of the card. So I would have probably chosen for something like this. I probably would not have chosen Don't Ask Me, Ask Siri. Would I have chosen It's Okay, He's Not From Here? Maybe that one. And then I would also kind of riff on it a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily say exactly how it was. So I might go with the Taco Tuesday one, just because that is such a silly thing for a robot to say. Taco Tuesday is followed by Windy Wednesday. Into that, so you're trying to lean into it. But I was always surprised to pick it up and be like, oh, I don't really do accents, and we talked about that a lot on the channel, and be like, that's very funny that I want an accents-based game on something that I don't do. I feel like I don't do well at all. To the point where I don't even really do accents in the game. In fact, everybody else I play with does more accents than I do. I just kind of talk like myself most of the time. And that's not true. I will change the cadence of how I talk in my body, because I don't want to do an accent. Often I don't want to do an accent, so I change the way that I might hold my body, or the way that I might phrase the words or speak them, or cadence or volume, timbre, stuff like that, the tonality of it. But I generally won't do an accent, because I'm like, I can never hold up an accent. I can barely hold an accent through a couple of sentences. I'm certainly not going to be able to hold it through an entire campaign's worth of conversations. Like, that's just not me, and it's not really a skill that I'm interested in pursuing as a dungeon master. I feel like I get a very little return on that investment, which would be a pretty big investment, I feel like, for me. But yeah, I just wanted to share that because I thought that was a funny thing that happened this past week. So one of the ones I wanted to talk to today about primarily was this show that I watched. It's very short. It's 4 episodes, called Shard Lake. So Shard Lake is a very my type of show. Let's put it that way. So that's why it would go in here. It was interesting, and I was like, yeah, this was actually pretty good. I'm surprised they didn't make another season of it. And then I was like, why didn't they make a season of it? So I started looking into Shard Lake, and I'll pull up the information. A picture of like the cast and stuff. It is it was very quick to realize like a couple of reasons why it didn't get renewed. Yeah, there we go. We'll do that. That's kind of our main character here, Shard Lake. Yeah, it's got Sean Bean. It's funny when you see things like that put Sean Bean on it. Sean Bean's got like 2 scenes in this show. That's it. He does that very Sean Bean thing where he's like, I'm just gonna be here and I'm just collecting a check, and he's fine. But and I think Sean Bean's pretty open about that. He's just not doing a lot more Lord of the Rings kind of stuff. Where that's why he's always in stuff where he dies, where he's like, I get my paycheck and then I get out. So he's almost like a career cameo actor at this point. But Shard Lake is about this guy who is he's a lawyer is what he is, in 16th century England. This is during Henry VIII, the guy with all the wives, and the dissolution of the monasteries. They're basically, this is the break from the Catholic Church, and they are trying to get the wealth out of these Catholic monasteries by shutting them down. The crown is trying to reclaim a lot of that wealth that's in their country that is technically under the control of, I guess I'm not familiar as much with the specifics of the dissolution of the monasteries. I don't know if at this point, because monasteries clearly must be Catholic, I think. There's no way they can be Anglican. So they're trying to find ways to basically get that back. So they're investigating things that happen at the monastery. Basically, the guy that's before Shard, like a different lawyer that he knows, was there investigating their books to make sure their accounts are all up to snuff, to make sure they're not, because they're just sniffing around for any reason to kind of shut these guys down and take all their wealth and redistribute it back to the crown. Which makes sense if you know anything about Western Europe, the church in general during this time period and through the Middle Ages and all that kind of stuff. That it's very powerful. A landowner owns a lot of power, owns a lot of wealth, and that's most of that wealth and that land is not accessible by the crown, the sovereigns of those nations, kingdoms, whatever they are at that point, principalities, dukedoms, etc. So they're looking for ways to get it back. Now, when you have a break with the Catholic Church because they don't let you divorce, you make your own church, and that surprisingly does not create a massive war in England. Exactly. So that's sort of the setup for the show. So he's there, he's investigating the death, or as they will find out very shortly, the murder of a lawyer who was sent there to check up on the monastery, and they're trying to find out a reason for the monastery to be shut down. And they want to use this death as a way to do that. And by any means possible, really. So that's what it's about. It's only 4 episodes, it's pretty short. But it's very interesting setup. It falls very much into the thread of a very formy kind of thing. Like I would also put things that are in this very same category. Would be like this game. The Name of the Rose. Which is an older movie, but it was also an Umberto Eco book. Where you have, very similarly, there are people investigating stuff at a monastery. Except in Name of the Rose, it's actually monks that are doing it, and not an outside person. But very similar, you have monks from different orders that are there at the same time. Something wacky's going on, they're trying to figure out what's happening. And so it is a very sort of, it's almost kind of like a procedural, not quite, which I'm not a huge fan of procedurals, but it is nice to see it in sort of like a different aspect and having to navigate a system that is different than sort of like the television legal system that I think we're used to in the US, is all procedurals are run off of, which is not the real legal system. But having to see this like different background to it does add something to it. So I'll just put this on here because this would also go on here. Which is good. They made a series not too long ago, like a new series, I think, like a Showtime series. But you can also just watch the old movie. The old movie's alright. I feel like it falls apart. There's the new show. I feel like the Sean Connery movie, falls apart a little bit towards the end. It's got kind of a weird ending, but overall I like it a lot. And Shard Lake is very similar in the idea that you have somebody here who's trying to do a very grounded, thoughtful investigation of what's going on here. They're trying to suss out facts, they're trying to get information done. Shard Lake's also a very interesting character because he is a crookback, which means that he has essentially a birth defect. He has a curved spine. But the cool thing is that this actor, you can see maybe his right hand here. He actually is disabled. So at first, when I was first watching it, I was like, I saw his arm, but he also had the big crookback thing. So I was like, oh, are they doing that thing where the actors actually got like their arm inside the crookback thing, and this is like a prosthetic thing that they're using, is a very practical effect kind of thing, because I hadn't seen them do stuff. But then they would show like some scenes where he was like walking around, and I was like, where are they hiding that arm? That doesn't really make sense. No, it turns out like this guy, that's just his arm. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, that's cool. Absolutely. I think it does add something to the character. This is and this I was gonna say maladaption, as his disablement actually plays into the story, which is really cool. I think they really leaned in on it, and it really gives a lot of, I don't know, again, not really grounding. Grounding's not really the right word, but it made that character feel a lot more real, which I guess is kind of grounding. Anyways, it's interesting. So if you like investigative kind of mystery stuff, very interesting. You have these two characters. He gets settled up with somebody. So you have the guy in the blue cloak. They do the classic blue versus red thing, where you have one that's very hot-blooded, one that's very kind of cool and calculating. So you have the Shardlake guy, who's very cool and calculated. I want the facts, and I'm getting to the bottom of the investigation. It'll take as much time as it takes. I need to get to the truth and understand what the justice is here. And then you have the other guy who gets saddled with, who's very brash. He really wants to like intimidate people, and he wants a very much more direct approach. Shardlake's very much interested in getting sort of like the justice of what's going on. And these are also based off of books. There's a book series about this character. And whereas Barrick, is that his name? I think Barrick, the guy in the red cloak, he's like, look, our mission is to get the monastery shut down. So truth is kind of whatever we need it to be. So he's way more flexible about it. And so they butt heads a little bit and go over things, but it's very interesting. I thought it was pretty. Here's the book series down here. This is based off of the first book, I think, which is Dissolution. So very interesting. I might pick up some of these books and read them at some point, because it was pretty good, and I'd like to know more about it. So I might do that. I might pick up one of these books and give them a read, see if I can get something like it. But yeah. If you're interested in that sort of time period and things like that, this was a really good thing. It kind of delves into sort of that religious politics of what's kind of going on. And if you wanted to see an example, I like it as an example of like, this is what, if I'm thinking in my mind, what a DnD investigation might, like legitimate judiciary investigation might look like from somebody who is like a bailiff or something like that. Like they're going around, they're talking to different people, very almost like sheriff kind of thing, where they're investigating people. They can kind of force people to do stuff, they can kind of not force things to do stuff, but you know, people might lie to them, people forge documents, people hide stuff, they have these revelations. And then there's the monastery itself, which is big and has I guess technically it's an abbey, not just a monastery, it's an abbey. And so it's big. It has a lot of different people in it. There's a bunch of people that live here, a lot of background actors. So there's this sense that there's lots of corners where things can happen. But yeah, it's very interesting. So if you like that kind of stuff, I'd say jump on it. Like I said, it felt like a show that was very me, because I like things like The Name of the Rose. So I knew that when I was like, oh, this is a guy going to investigate something at a monastery. Well, I already have another piece of media that I like that's very much that. So I will probably like this. And then I did. Now the problem is that, first of all, as somebody who is clearly the prime audience for this, how I never heard about this show when it came out, because it didn't just come out recently. Shardlake came out 2023, I think. Yeah, and so it's got pretty good ratings, like an 81%. That's not bad. So it's pretty good. I mean, like, people liked it. It's interesting. Is it perfect? Is it like the greatest thing I've ever watched? No, it's fine. But I like the main character, which is good because you're gonna spend a lot of time with him. So it is interesting to watch. But the thing that really stuck out to me is, like, I had never heard of it, which is weird because I'm like clearly the prime audience for it. No, I guess it came out last year, 2024. But they're not going to do any more of them. It's like, okay, so I am absolutely the target demographic for it. Never saw any marketing about this whatsoever when it came out. The other thing is that it's a Disney Plus network show, which is very interesting. Because when I think Disney shows, I definitely think mid-16th century historical procedural drama, kind of investigative drama mystery. No. And when I think about the people who have Disney Plus, I'm like, who? When I found out that Disney Plus made it, I was like, I'm not even sure how this got greenlit for your studio. Because I'm like, we know that the people who watch Disney are primarily focused on Disney properties. And the Disney properties tend to be like superheroes and Disney princesses and a lot of animated stuff. And Disney's got this very sort of like generally family oriented, wholesome, that tends to be most of their programming. So this series does not really fall with this. When I saw this series originally and I saw the first thing, I was like, oh, this must be like a weird like BBC thing or like an Acorn TV thing. It felt very British, and so that's what I thought it was gonna be. And then I was like, oh, it's a Disney project. That's weird. Why a Disney project? But yeah, and I'd say go check it out. And very easy to get. It's on Hulu right now, which is where I watched it. Fun. Check it out. Got that kind of stuff in it. Let's see. Is there something else we want to add in the time we have remaining? The Name of the Rose is very similar. Again, it is not often one you find. I find that movie streaming very often for free, but it is good to check up on. I also just started watching King Conqueror. I don't know how I feel about that yet. I didn't like that one quite as much. Did I put Sid on here? No, let's do that. Yeah, because this is another one that I watched recently that was pretty good. Yeah. The Legend of El Cid, and that was pretty good. It starts off really strong and then kind of gets, kind of loses steam towards the end in the second season, honestly. But El Cid, not the animated one. But this one. It's really good. I really liked it because it really kind of focuses in on specifically how few people are generally in. Yeah, because this was an Amazon Prime show. I believe it's done. I don't think they're going to make another one of these. Another season. But it does focus in a little bit more on the specifics of. It feels small in a more realistic kind of way. So if you're not familiar with El Cid, which I wasn't before I started watching it, legendary figure in Spain, particularly at this time, it is what the Kingdom of Leon is where he's at, and it talks about the king does that thing where they die and then they give like all the sons a portion of it, which historically never goes well. What happens is all the brothers immediately try to kill each other and try to bring all the land back under one crown, and that is a lot of what else it's about as well. Certainly the second season, but it was nice to see it. Like, it felt small. It felt like it shined a little bit more of an eye on the training aspect of like how somebody becomes a knight, because El Cid basically starts off as a page. He's like nobody. He becomes a page, becomes a squire through his battlefield exploits, essentially, and some of his diplomatic exploits. He rises himself up to be basically the knight's first king, or the king's first knight. Sorry. And very interesting to see how that goes through. Like I said, as you get on and kind of get into that second season, it breaks down a little bit. They do some weird stuff. It goes a little bit, kind of starts off as kind of a historical drama, and it's a little stronger on the historical kind of, I feel like, in that first season, and then on the second season those scales tip a bit and we go way more towards the drama that's kind of going on, where you see things where like a guy cuts open another guy's chainmail shirt with a sword and you're like, how does that work? But that's not how that works. And I'm like, so why are you guys wearing this chainmail shirt if a sword swipe will just... I mean, that's a movie armor thing, which is always a problem. But that usually they're not quite that egregious. It's just like you literally watch him just like slash the guy and be like, well, now your chainmail's rent. Like, that's not how that works. Why would we wear it if it didn't basically protect you from sword strikes? As well as other stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. He rolled a 20 in max damage. I'm sure, yeah. He took the sunder. He decided to sunder armor instead, and then rolled max damage with a d20. Yeah, it happens more than once in the show, which is kind of the issue. But like I said, it very much leans into the drama aspect in the second season, a little less out of the historical. So the first season, I think, is a little bit better. But it's nice to see throne rooms that in the castle that feels kind of small. And I'm not sure how much of this is, because I haven't looked too much into it, how much of it is historical, as in they're using a historical location, and how much of it is a budget constraint thing. Because most of the interior shots are, even things that are like the throne rooms, are relatively small affairs. But for the amount of actors they generally have kind of going on, I don't know, it feels like the right amount of people are in the scene, if that makes sense. It doesn't feel like there's too many people, but not enough that it feels like, oh, this is definitely an empty thing. Because sometimes you'll come across that. I've seen in a lot of media depictions where you'll have like this giant courtyard, like the bailey of the castle, and there's like a dude on the wall looking out, and then there's basically nobody in the bailey except for the 2 or 3 characters that are probably like walking and talking. There might be like a couple of people in the background. You'd be like, there should probably be like 20 people in the background. And this show feels a little bit closer to that, and be like, oh, and you always see, because the guys that becomes a night through the show, you always see like the warriors training, which is really nice. You always see the pages and squires training and talking about serving their knights, or serving at seeing that hierarchy within that, which is really not something we see very often in a lot of depictions of media of medievalish times. So yeah, I definitely would put this one on my list. Now, it is in Spanish, so that depends if that will make it or break it for you. Doesn't matter to me. I ended up watching the dub, surprisingly. Usually I watch subtitles if I'm going to watch something in a foreign language. But I felt like the dub was mostly good. And so, I don't know, it was one of those things where sometimes I also like to watch the dub on and the subtitles on at the same time, because they don't always match up, so sometimes I get better or more accurate information from one of them rather than the other. I feel like, oh, they're trying to say this, but they actually said this. And sometimes that's helpful to know the difference. But yeah, I mean, like, it's neat, it's fun, it's interesting, it's got a lot of drama in it, especially in the first season. It's got some pretty good fights in it. Second season, like I said, kind of goes a little bit more towards the drama aspect and a little bit away from a little bit of the more historical aspect. But it is interesting. And so if you're looking for something, I think there's 2 seasons. I think they're 5 episodes apiece. So if you've got to, I think they're about 45 minutes an episode, maybe. So if you got some time on your hands, I'd say go check it out. It's on Amazon Prime. You can watch it for free if you want to, if you're the ad supported or however you do it. But yeah, I'm going to add those 2 today. The Shard Lake, which I think I would probably, I added 3 things. So I added Legend of El Cid, Shard Lake, and The Name of the Rose. If I was going to say pick one to watch, I'd probably say Name of the Rose, just because it's a movie, so it's a little bit less of an investment. It's an older movie, so you have to be prepared for that, because it's from like 88? Even that new? Something like that. Yeah, might be newer than that. Maybe 83. Anyways, from the 80s. So you have to be prepared for that when you're watching it. But I think it's good. It's the easiest one to get into if you're interested in learning a little bit more about like the monastery aspect, and you want to maybe bring that to D&D more to bear. They talk about that. There's a lot of things that there are people that die. There's mystery, so you kind of understand maybe a little bit of scientific investigation about how people might do that, how you might want to create mysteries for your own D&D games, I think that's a very easy way to do that. It's very quick to get some of that stuff because they do some interesting stuff. Umberto Eco novel, so it's going to be good. So the stuff's going to be pretty neat in it. So I'd say definitely take that. Next, I'd say take Shard Lake. Again, 4 episodes. They're between 45 to 50 minutes, I think, for the most part. So pretty easy to watch. You can sit down if you have a missed D&D game that's like 4 hours. You can sit down and watch the whole thing in one go if you want. It's pretty easy to get through. It's interesting. I like the characters. I like the way that they deal with things. The stuff that goes on that they kind of underpin. It felt like a pretty consolidated into 4 episodes. Like it really probably could have been, I'd say easily 6 to maybe develop a little bit more of the intrigue that was going on. But I'd rather have a show I feel like that feels a little rushed than a show that has way too many episodes and a bunch of filler in it that's not really important to anything that's going on. A bunch of fluff. So I prefer that it's short and has pretty good cadence. It has a pretty good clip. It doesn't waste too much time, I feel like. And then, and Legend of El Cid, I definitely say watch the first season. The first season is pretty good. And then I'd say, if you liked it enough, watch the second season. The only thing that I will add that the second season is really good at, you don't get to see in the first season, is watching one of the kings deal with nobility. Dealing with nobles in an area who may or may not really give that person loyalty. You do watch people who, specifically nobles who give oaths to a king and then not great, really conforming to their liege lord. That does happen a few times. I guess it happens in the first season. But yeah, it's really pronounced in the second season to very drastic consequences. And then seeing that nobody really has a problem with them then swearing allegiance to somebody else and be like, I would not take that very seriously. I would not assume that those people are doing that in good faith, because you have already shown me that you're not doing that in good faith. But yeah, interesting, fun things to pick up in media. I've got a few other things. Like I said, I'm watching King and Conqueror. I watched the first episode of. It's another Amazon Prime show, I think. It is, I feel like, not as good. We'll see. We'll see how it develops a little bit. It's also got the guy who played Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones in it, which I did not know. Heard it. And he's one of the 2, I guess, primary main characters. It's about it's pretty much about the relationship between William the Conqueror from Normandy and the Norman invasion of England, and what's his face from Wessex, right? I mean, Edward the Confessor, he's the king right now, but his name is Godwin's son. His name starts with an H. Harold? Is that what his name is? Harold Godwin's son? Yeah, I think so. Who's becomes the Earl of Wessex. But yeah, is Godwin's son. Godwin is his father, who is the Earl of Wessex, at least at this point. And the crossing, this is how you see basically the Norman invasion of England. So if you're interested in that time period and understanding stuff that's going on with that, got a lot more political kind of stuff going on with it, but also not, at least in the first episode, not super intriguing yet. I'll probably give it another episode or two. Actually, there's not that many episodes. I might just watch the whole thing anyway. But I don't know if I would recommend it yet. Let's put it that way. Because it does that. It feels very TV-ish in that everybody wears leather, even though that's not how that works. Everybody uses swords, and again, it's that's not how that works. Though they do some interesting stuff, like identifying a sword by its construction as to where it's from. You talk about a moneyer or money exchanger who is forging their own coins, so making the silver go farther. So they had some intrigue. They started setting up some cool historical stuff, in that the coin shaving and things like that were common issues. as well as being able to try to identify who got attacked from where and trying to follow some of those clues, which I like some of that stuff, which can be very interesting to follow. But again, there's a lot of other stuff kind of going on with the show that makes me not sure if I can actually recommend it yet. We'll see. So you'll have to tune in to see if I'll have to watch some more of it, actually, see how I feel about it. But I think that's going to be everything for the stream today, guys. So thanks, of course, for checking out. I don't think I have anything else to add here. And talked about that. If you have, of course, any thoughts on the Counterspell stuff that we talked about, go ahead and throw those in the comments. I'm happy to see what maybe other people's takes are on Counterspell, whether you agree or disagree with sort of my thoughts on it, or how maybe you change it instead, or some sort of house rule that maybe you're already using. Or maybe you look at that stuff and you think Counterspell doesn't have any problems in D&D and in fact should be more powerful. I can't imagine that is probably most people's thoughts, but you know, there's a opinion about everything. You know what they say, the opinions of buttholes, right? We all got them. But yeah, that's everything for me today. Thanks for hanging out with the stream with me, guys. This is always fun, and we'll hop back at this. I think next week. I think we should be back. I may be doing another Twitch stream. We'll see. I was going to do it the other day, and then I just kind of didn't get around to it, and I ended up changing the game I was playing. So I don't know if we might jump in. We might play that. We might not. We'll have to see. So if you want to check that out, you can always check out the Twitch. I'm going to try to do some of the non-D&D stuff over there. And that's twitch.tv/RedRaggedFiend. It's the same place here. If you like this stuff, go ahead and like this. And if you want to see more of this kind of stuff, you can always subscribe and get notified when I got new stuff coming out, which is usually about once a week, usually. But yeah, that's everything for me. There's the blog, there's DriveThruRPG, all that stuff's down in the notes. If you want to know extra stuff and how to get in contact with me and all that good stuff. So that's it for me, guys. Have fun. Have a great weekend. If you're watching this on the weekend, if it's a weekday, hope you had a good day. And we'll talk to you next time. All right? Bye-bye.